Hey guys, Diamond Dad here. Welcome to another episode of Diamond Hand Coaching. Today I want to go over swapping Pulsex for Pulse PreBridge. Is this a good idea? There's a few things that we need to consider before we think about swapping Pulsex for Pulse PreBridge. Number one, and I think the most important thing to consider, is what was your sacrifice rate? Secondly, which ticker are you most bullish on? And thirdly, how much will the swap affect your bottom line? So what do I mean when I say PreBridge Swap? Richard Hart has said there will be a 24 to 48 hour window before the bridge is available that we can use Pulsex as a swap and allow us to swap the native tokens on Pulse chain. So this will allow us to swap the coins before there's fiat value assigned. So what do I mean by that? Once Pulse is launched, we will have coins that exist only on the Pulse network. For one, all of our copied ERC20s that are now PRC20s will exist on the Pulse network. If you have Hex, you will now have Hex on the Pulse network. If you sacrifice for Pulse, you will have Pulse. If you sacrifice for Pulsex, you will have Pulsex. And this 24 to 48 hour period will allow you to swap your Pulsex for Pulse, or your PHEX, it's just Hex, but your Hex for Pulse. A lot of people will be able to make these swaps. So how does this differ from post-bridge, or once we can bridge in coins from the Ethereum network? What's important to understand is once the bridge is open, we'll have fiat value attached to these pairs, okay? So for instance, if we have a ERC20 like USDC that has a $1 value to it, we bridge that into the Pulse network, and someone places in the Pulsex DEX, decentralized exchange, a pair of, let's say, 1 USDC for 10,000 Pulse. At that point, as soon as someone is willing to make that trade, we have a value for Pulse, okay? 10,000 Pulse is worth 1 USDC or $1, and now there's actual real world value attached to Pulse and Pulsex. And that's how we're going to extract real value. Now there's other pairs that can happen. People can take their Hex and pair it with their Ethereum Hex, which will give value depending on the trade setup. And this is how decentralized exchanges work. So the most important question to answer is, what is your sacrifice rate? Okay. If you don't know what your sacrifice rate is, I encourage you to figure that out, okay? You need to go onto pulsexlead.com and you can find your wallet address as long as it's on Ethereum, and you can see how much sacrifice points you earned per $1. You should know this because hopefully you did the research before you just threw money randomly at Richard Hart. No expectation to work from others, but most of you will know what your sacrifice rate is. The other benefit of pulsexlead.com is you can see your multiplier. Don't forget that you get bonus points depending on your ranking on the ladder. Why is your sacrifice rate important? Your sacrifice rate determines your per unit cost, or how much you were able to buy each Pulsex for, or Pulse. A lot of people say we're getting Pulsex for free. Yes, that is true. No expectation of work from others. We threw our money into a garbage can, and one day we're going to get we'll probably most likely get Pulsex into our wallet. We got it for free. But technically, the amount of money that you sacrificed and the amount of Pulsex that you get will determine how much you paid for each one of those Pulsex, and that's what we need to figure out. So how do you figure that out? Once you understand your sacrifice points, you basically just do 1 divided by your total sacrifice points. An example is if you sacrifice 10,000 USD for Pulsex, that would earn you about 100 million Pulsex points, or Pulsex. Plus, you would have a multiplier of about 1,225. I found this out by just looking at a $10,000 sacrifice on pulsexlead.com. So your multiplier would leave you with 122,500,000 Pulsex points, or Pulsex at launch. So your per unit cost 1 divided by the 122,500,000 is you bought Pulsex for 0.0008. That's your entry point. Very important that you figure this out because that will determine what you're willing to swap Pulse for later on. What ticker are you most bullish on? I think the sacrifice rate is the most important pumpamental, and I'll explain why with math later. But if I had to choose, I would say I'm 50-50. Now, that sounds like a cop-out. It sounds like the weather guy when he says there's a 50% chance of rain. It's like, bro, is it gonna rain or not, right? I don't think it's a cop-out. What I mean is I think they will perform very similarly, very close to one another. I think they will perform very close to one another. Why is similarly such a weird word? Maybe I just don't know how to say it. So I don't think necessarily that Pulsex will outperform Pulse, and I don't think that Pulse will necessarily outperform Pulsex. Now, they may a little bit here and there. One might outperform the other, but I don't know. Okay, all of the research I've done leads me to believe they're going to be pretty similar. Some common arguments is that the buy and burn feature of Pulse and X will create high buy pressure, which will help it outperform Pulse. That's a good point. But some people, an argument for Pulse is that Ethereum has outperformed all of the layer 2, basically Ethereum has outperformed any smart contract built on top of the Ethereum network, except X, which is another great point. Now, my question with that is are they talking about 2-year-old Ethereum versus 2-year-old Uniswap, or are they talking about 5-year-old Ethereum versus 2-year-old Uniswap? That's not a very fair comparison. I haven't done that math myself because I just flat out really don't care. Again, I'm like 50-50 which one is going to outperform the other one. Like personally, I just don't know. So how much will the swap affect your bottom line? First, we must consider potential pairs. Someone out there might be willing to trade one Pulsex for one Pulse, okay? Technically, I think the holders of Pulse hold the cards in this scenario and they will set the rate. Because I think one of the reasons Pulsex got $1 billion sacrificed is because there's a lot of people excited about Pulse and they wanted to make this swap, okay? So we can see that Pulsex is about twice as popular, which means the demand on Pulse is at minimum, I think, a 2x demand on Pulse. So I think the most common pair that we see is probably a 2-to-1. People are willing to trade 2 Pulsex for 1 Pulse. But the reality is we may not even see that pair. Everyone who holds Pulse understand they completely hold the cards in this scenario, and we may see a 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, or 5-to-1 pair that people say, hey, I have a lot of Pulse, you don't have any Pulse, you got a lot of Pulsex, I will trade you 5-to-1 Pulsex to Pulse. Now, is that a good trade? How do we know if it's a good trade or not? It has less to do with the pumpamentals of the coin and more to do with our sacrifice rate. What do I mean? If you sacrifice, or if you trade 1-to-1, you're basically trading your original sacrifice rate of Pulsex for a new sacrifice rate with Pulse. And that would be $1 equals 12,000 Pulse if you trade 1-to-1, which means your first 10x in Pulse would be at the 0.08 mark. 10x, I will take it, especially if you were lucky enough to do 10,000, that's $100,000. But if you traded 2-to-1 Pulsex to Pulse, you have officially traded your original rate of $1 for 12,000 Pulsex for $1 for 6,000 Pulse, which means you don't get your first 10x until 0.0016. A 3-to-1 trade, it's $1 to 4,000. You see your first 10x at 0.02. 4-to-1, so $1 to $3,000 rate, which is 10x, 0.03. 5-to-1, you have officially, your sacrifice rate on Pulse was $1 for 2,400 Pulse, which means you aren't going to see your first 10x until 0.04. This is what's important to understand. If you make a 5-to-1 trade from Pulsex to Pulse, you are making the gamble that Pulse will outperform Pulsex 5-to-1. Now, that may be your thesis, and if that's your thesis, make the trade. I personally don't think that Pulse will outperform Pulsex like that. I think that's a dumb trade. straight up. I would like to trade some Pulsex for Pulse, but I'll only make that trade 1-to-1, pre-bridge, straight up. That's the only trade I'll make. So how did I figure out these numbers? This is a spreadsheet I made. I'm not the greatest mathematician. I literally had to text like 3 people just to figure out how to do this, but I think I figured it out, and I think it makes pretty good sense. Here we have our amount of Pulse, X points, your rate, your original rate, your amount invested, which was $10,000. Okay, I went to pulsexlead.com to figure out that would earn me about a 1.2 multiplier, which is 12,000 Pulsex per $1. That $10,000 bought me 120 million Pulsex, which gives me a rate of 0.00008. If I make a 2-to-1 trade, 6,000, 4,000, 3,000, 2,400. We went over all of this. You can see here at 0.008, we have made 10x at $100,000 if we wouldn't have made the trade or we made 1-to-1. Now what's crazy is if you make a 5-to-1 trade at the same price, 0.008, you have only made like a 2x. So let that sink in. We went over this, but in order to have made your 10x, it needs to be 0.04167, which is just a light year. It's just so far away from 0.008. Like, look how many decimal points that is. That is unbelievable. That's so far away. So, like, I mean, if you think Pulse is gonna trade like 5 times more, it's 5 times more valuable than Pulsex, then I mean, make that trade. Like, absolutely 100% make that trade if that's your call. But really, you think that? Your call. So, closing thoughts. Is it worth it? That's up to you to decide. I'm just trying to provide the facts and some things that maybe you weren't thinking about in this pre-bridge swap. In my opinion, it might be worth waiting for real fiat value. Why? Because unless Pulse outperforms Pulsex like 10-to-1, then I'll eat my hat. I mean, I'm not really going to be making trades, and I'll be happy either way. But I mean, if that happens, then it's like, geez, you know, that's a surprise. At that point, you would be able to say, I have $10,000 of Pulsex, and I want to trade it for $10,000 worth of Pulse, and you would know exactly what you're doing with that trade. The odds are that Pulse and Pulsex are going to be pretty similar, and it's just going to be much better to know that you can trade 100,000 Pulsex or you know, 30,000 Pulsex for $30,000, talking fiat, $30,000 Pulsex for $30,000 Pulse, or whatever trade you want to make. At least you'll know exactly what that fiat value is, and like, you'll just have the information you need to make better decisions. At the end of the day, you have no idea what has more upside potential. None of us do. And those of you out there who are making price predictions, I'm just like, you have no idea. So all you guys watching videos that say my price prediction for Pulse, nobody can know. There's no way to know. Okay, that's just the reality. Finally, the inverse is true for Pulse to Pulsex trade. If you trade your Pulse 5-to-1 for Pulsex, you have 5x'd your initial sacrifice rate in Pulse. So I will be 100% honest with you guys. There's a very high chance that I am going to set up some ridiculous pairs in Pulsex pre-bridge. Like, I might throw up a 10-to-1 Pulsex to Pulse trade. That means that 0.000, like that means that my 10x comes 10 times faster. It's not 0.008. Like, maybe I should have done this math, the reverse math, but I'm just saying could be a really good opportunity to actually set up some ridiculous pairs. Like, even a 5-to-1 pair might be good. The question is people going to trade into that? Yes, I think people will trade into that, because no one's going to watch very few people are going to watch this video. Very few people are thinking through this. Very few people have done the math. They just think, okay, want Pulse. I have Pulse X, make trade, 5-to-1. Yes, okay, whatever. So I'm absolutely going to set up some dirty pairs on Pulsex and just hope that someone trades into it. Because at the end of the day, it's like, hey man, you should have watched this video. You should have done your own research. Thank you, and I'll see ya on the upside. So hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully this helped shine some light into this Pulsex Pulse Swap pre-bridge. Hopefully this provided some information to help you make that decision on your own. I'm not trying to tell people what to do or how to do it. I mean, this isn't financial advice. It just is some numbers and some math that might help you consider what you're willing to trade and let your Pulsex go for. Hopefully this was helpful. Until next time, I encourage you to continue to upgrade your gray matter because one day it may matter. Until next time, the Diamond Dad signing off.